And we're just at 7 o'clock right now. Let's see. All right, well, I will watch and see if I notice them trying to enter, and we'll get started. So welcome, I'm Jane Garver. I'm the executive director at the Little Traverse History Museum in Petoskey. And this month we are revisiting, or this year we are revisiting our programs from 1974 because we're celebrating our 50th anniversary as a museum. So in 1974, they didn't actually do a program in September because they were gearing up for the visitors from our sister city, Makino, I'm not sure how to say it, and it's not a city anymore, and I'll talk about that. So rather than present a program, because they didn't present one, I thought I would talk a little bit about the history of the sister cities and how that all came to be, which is pretty interesting. So in 1968, oh, sorry, I'm going to back up. 1956. So the Sister City program started in 1956 when President Eisenhower proposed a people-to-people citizenship diplomacy. And it was originally part of a program called the National League of Cities. And then Sister Cities International became a separate nonprofit corporation in 1967. In 1968, Japan contacted the US State Department looking for a sister state relationship for Shiga Prefecture. And you can see the red arrow on the screen is pointing to Shiga. Michigan was selected to be the sister state for Shiga Prefecture. So they contacted George Romney, who was our governor at the time. The similarities between Shiga Prefecture and Michigan included our natural resources, the fact that Shiga is heavily populated in the southern part of the prefecture and not so much in the north, very similar to Michigan, that they have ski resorts, skiing, tourism, are all part of Shiga province, and both Michigan and Shiga have freshwater lakes, very large freshwater lakes. In Shiga, their lake is called Lake Biwa. Also, we have very similar climates. So Governor Romney handed the project over to the DNR, which is an interesting choice. The director of the DNR was Ralph McMullen, and he handed it over to his executive assistant, who later became the deputy director, Sam Milstein. And Sam happened to be from East Jordan, Michigan. Sam wanted the program to be a cultural program, not a commercial program. And so he spent 6 months sending telegrams. This is back in 1968, sending telegrams back and forth to his counterpart in Shiga Prefecture to organize this sister state program. He finally arranged a signing ceremony at Kellogg Center at Michigan State University. And we have a letter from him where he is describing how he got started and how he set all this up. And he said in his letter that they had a hiccup right at the end because he didn't realize the protocol of how your city, state, and country are listed, and your leader. So he had listed for Michigan, Governor Romney, and then Michigan, United States. And he had done the same for the governor or the leader of Shiga province and didn't realize that you had to list Japan first. And so he wrote that it was a scramble at the last minute, but everything worked out in the end. So Michigan and Shiga Prefecture became sister states in November of 1968. So they decided, Sam Milstein and his counterpart, who became a very good friend of his from the different things that I've read. So that was very interesting. They decided that they would exchange visitors every other year. And Shiga sent a delegation to Michigan in 1969. The first visitors were teachers, students, and some government employees. And they went to Mackinac Island and Greenfield Village. The first sister cities were the capitals of Shiga and Michigan. The first Michigan trip to Shiga was in 1970. They took 60 people from Michigan, mostly from the Detroit Economic Club. And while they were touring in Japan, they toured possible sister cities. So they were looking for what would be good pairings for cities in Shiga and cities in Michigan. So they were kind of touring around to set things up for the future. Sam Milstein said he started with a budget through the DNR of $5,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was better than the nothing that it was cut to after just a couple of years. So then he had no budget at all. Any Michigan visitors had to pay their own way to travel to Japan. To contrast that with the Japanese who the government paid for, and they had thousands of applicants every year wanting to take the trip. So Petoskey was matched up with Makino, Japan, and it's no longer a city because it was merged. And so that's why the arrow on this map is pointing to Takashima, because it merged with several others. But in the 1960s and in 1970, when we were matched up, it was Makino because of similarities like having a ski resort. When we were matched up, they had a population of 7,000, so a very similar population. They had beaches and a ski resort, just like us. And they had cherry trees, which is more Traverse City, but still. So that was why we were chosen to be their sister city. Oh, and they had 4 elementary schools and 1 junior high. So lots of similarities. In May of 1974, we were going to send some people to Makino, and the Town Affiliation Association, which was in Michigan, not just Petoskey, was looking for youth to send to the various sister cities in Japan. They were looking for people between the ages of 18 and 30 who were able to pay their own way. The mayors of Petoskey and Makino exchanged letters, and they have done that several times over the years since. Other participating Michigan cities in the Sister Cities program are Ann Arbor, Detroit, Grosse Pointe Farms, Kalamazoo, Lansing, Saginaw, Sturgis, Traverse City, and Wyandotte. So in the beginning, at least, when they were organizing these trips, it was a Michigan trip, and then, and I think it might still be that way. And then the people would kind of break off and go to their own sister city. So they'd all travel together to Shiga Prefecture and then travel to the city that they were paired with. In September of 1974, 23 people from Makino visited Petoskey. So they had visited Michigan, but this was the first Petoskey visit from Japan. They flew into the Sioux and saw the Sioux Locks. They visited Mackinac Island. They were welcomed in City Hall by Mayor Barbara Waters. They were given gifts such as a small butcher's block from Michigan maple block and some Petoskey stones. And as we go through the years, you'll note a trend. They visited with their working counterparts at the post office, a floral shop, at schools if they were teachers. They visited Lockwood Hospital. So they're kind of paired up with someone in the community who had their job or a similar job. And the 4 women in the group were taken shopping by Miss Jessup. The visitors from Japan were surprised to see made in Japan labels on things. This was in 1974. And they were also surprised that so many places operated on credit. And I had already created this program, and so I knew that. And then today at school, I teach in Charlevoix, we watch student news, and one of the news segments was about how in Japan, over 60% of transactions are done in cash still, so they don't use credit as much. So I thought that was really interesting. So in 1974, they were very surprised to see people using credit cards. The group in 1974 also visited the museum, and Mert Carter, who was the director at the time in the museum, remember, had just opened. So Mert was able to take them on a tour of the museum. They saw the passenger pigeon mural, and he talked to them about Ernest Hemingway and Odawa art. In February of 1975, the mayor received a letter from Japan stating that a decorative fan was coming in the mail. And I don't know which of these fans was the first one to arrive, but you can see these now at City Hall. They're in a showcase when you enter the building. So you can see all the different things that have been sent over the years or brought back from Japan. In 1975, Sam Milstein, the one who was charged with organizing this whole program, was sent to Japan to represent Governor Milliken at the funeral of the Japanese governor. So the governor of Shiga Prefecture had passed away, and Governor Milliken couldn't go or didn't go. And so Sam Milstein went to the funeral instead. He was invited to speak at the funeral. There was a crowd of 20,000 people, including the Emperor of Japan, Emperor Hirohito. So that was something that Sam Milstein mentioned in his letter when he was describing this was a really big moment. And I don't think he realized how big the crowd was going to be when he agreed to speak. In 1976, some visitors were coming from Japan, and the Bicentennial Committee was in charge of their visit that year. Bob Kaiser was the chair of the Bicentennial Committee, and so because he was chair of that committee, the Japanese visit also fell to him. They planned for 14 people to come to Petoskey, and similar to how the Michigan visitors would go to Shiga Prefecture and then go to the different cities, the Japanese did the same. So a whole group came to Michigan and then split up and visited the different cities. So for that visit, they planned a party at Walloon Lake, and a tour of Michigan maple black and the cement plant. So here's an interior shot of the cement plant that they visited. They also had a picnic at the waterfront, a potluck lunch at the waterfront, and visited the museum. And so here's a little reminder of what the waterfront might have looked like when they were visiting. Not as pretty as it is today. We had some different people who had a chance to go to Japan. Mr. and Mrs. Art Shaw and Ruth Kalkbrenner visited Japan, and they brought back gifts that they presented to Mayor Joe Kilborn and the city council, including a silk scenic portrait of Makino. Here's Sam Milstein. By this time, he was on the city council here in Petoskey, so I think he must have retired or was about to retire from his job at the DNR. So he's displaying the gifts. Here's another scene of presenting pictures and gifts. Whoops, went one too far. And they took Michigan maple black. They didn't take anything this big. They took a small butcher black and Petoskey stones with them. In 1978, the Japanese visitors came to Petoskey. They went to Mackinac Island. They went to the U of M biology station. They toured Michigan maple black. They toured the museum, and they toured Petoskey manufacturing. So Michigan maple black played a really important part in the visits between Petoskey and Makino, because when we traveled there, we always took them something from Michigan maple black. And when they came here, we always gave them a tour of Michigan maple black. So I think a lot of visitors, a lot of people in Makino have some Michigan maple black products. In 1979, a group from here was going to Japan, and the cost was $1,275 per person in 1979. And remember, the people from Michigan had to pay their own way. In November of 1979, 18 Michigan teachers visited Makino, so from around the state, but they all happened to visit our sister city. In 1980, we had 11 Japanese visitors that came here. And this time the visit was sponsored by the Kiwanis Club, and the tours and travel were organized around the area were organized by the Kiwanis Club and the Chamber of Commerce. They were again greeted by a picnic at the waterfront. They toured Petoskey Plastics, Petoskey Manufacturing, the hospital, and Michigan Maple Black, of course. They had lunch at the Bayview Inn with their Kiwanis hosts, and they took a trip to Mackinac Island. This was when Sam Milstein was about to retire from the state. He had a meeting with Governor Milliken, and he suggested that the program be moved from the DNR to the Department of Education. So I think that makes more sense for the Department of Education to kind of oversee the program. Here we go. In 1982, 11 visitors came. This time they had a cookout on the Bear River with the Rotary Club. So it seems every time they visited, we would have different people act as hosts. They toured Mackinac Island again, and they brought a painting to give to the city. So this picture is more of the objects that are at City Hall. There's two showcases next to each other. So these are some more of the objects. So you could probably visit and see them better in person than my photographs. Sam Milstein went back to Japan, representing the governor at the dedication of the tour ship named Michigan. This is a ship or a paddle wheel steamer that travels around their big lake, Lake Biwa, and they named it Michigan because we are sister states, and it was modeled after the Mississippi River Queen. Not related to Michigan, but that's okay. So Sam Milstein represented Michigan again at the dedication of this boat, which I think is still touring from what I could tell. So that was pretty interesting. In 1985, some of our counterparts in Japan sent origami paper to the city. And so some people, mostly from the library, but also some other people who have been involved in the exchange, set up a Japanese festival. So they held the festival around town. Some of it was at North Central Michigan College, some at the library, some at the Art Center. They held a Japanese dinner. They showed the artifacts that have been exchanged over the years. They showed a film on paper making. They had a doll display. They had a workshop on paper making. And then there were some students involved. And I liked this part as a teacher. They watched film strips in 1985 about haiku poems, and then the students wrote haiku poems and they were published in the newspaper. In 1986, a Japanese visitor who had gone to see the musical Annie. I don't know if it was at Bayview or where he saw the musical, but he created his own music video in Japan in 1986, and he sent it to us to say, hey, I really enjoyed my visit, I guess. Also, in 1986, we had 6 visitors who came to Petoskey. They had a chicken barbecue at Crooked Tree, which sounded interesting. They were given gifts of a quill box, a history book, a windsock, a hoodie, note cards, and a cassette tape of the Epsilon Jazz Band. So somebody said, hey, they've been getting a lot of Michigan Maple Black. And then they didn't even visit Michigan Maple Black. They visited Town and Country Homes, the hospital, Kilwins, and of course, Mackinac Island. In the 80s, we had the exchange several times. Ray Arthur, who was a teacher at Petoskey High School, went to Japan and was invited to speak at a town meeting there. When he visited, we had visitors back and forth. 6 visitors came in 1988. And then in 1989, someone who had been on the exchange 5 years previous came back to Petoskey on his honeymoon because he wanted to show his bride Petoskey and how wonderful it was, and brought a gift of videos of his hometown, and we gave him a Petoskey stone desk set as a gift. We had more visitors in the 90s, 1990, and then in 1991, Cellular One opened in Petoskey, and Mayor Herb Carlson called Japan on a cell phone to sort of initiate Cellular One opening here. So that was a big event. Now, of course, we wouldn't think too much about being able to call Japan so easily, but remember when Sam Milstein was setting up all of his organization at the beginning, and he was sending telegrams back and forth. So to be able to call so easily on a cell phone was really something. We continued exchanging paintings and Petoskey stones and silk paintings and silk fans and Petoskey stones. Lots of those being exchanged. Um, in 1994, they had about 15 visitors coming. So it had dwindled down to about 6, but in 1994, they had 15 visitors coming. They were looking for housing and they planned visits to Sturgeon River Pottery, the museum, the concert in the park, and sidewalk sales. And then some of the people who had been involved in the exchange several times said the mayor of Makino has over 40 Petoskey stones. Could we think of something else to give as a gift? And so then suggestions were made, including more quill boxes because they hadn't exchanged many of those. And Sam Milstein suggested that maybe instead of Mackinac Island, they should go to some of the ski resorts, except that it was summer. So they decided that wouldn't be so great. In 1995, we had a contingent of middle school students from Japan who came and stayed for a week here in Petoskey and attended Petoskey Middle School, and got to tour around and go to Mackinac and see the bridge and different things like that. So that was a little bit different because previous to that, it had always been adults that traveled. And this time it was a student exchange. So that was in 1995. And then in 2000, some Petoskey students went to Makino. So students from the middle and high school got to go and spent 10 days in Makino. And of course, they had to do a lot of fundraisers because that was how our exchange had worked from the beginning, was that our visitors had to pay their own way. So in 2005, Takashima was formed. So they brought together several smaller cities into this one big city. So now our Makino sister city is no more. And instead we exchange with Takashima, which is much larger. And you can see their Lake Biwa on the map as well. In 2015, this is when the News Review used to do that world photo or where in the world. And so here's the News Review being read in Takashima. In 2020, our sister state, Shiga, sent 10,000 masks to Michigan. So the relationship has been going on for such a long time. And we send things to them and they send things to us. And so it's not just a exchange of people all the time, but also of ideas and an exchange of different items. And especially I thought this was interesting that they sent us masks during the pandemic. This year we had some visitors who were just here a few weeks ago who came from Japan. So the program we hadn't done actual visits in a few years because of the pandemic, but this year they came. And I'm not sure how many visitors there were because they were going to come to the museum, and I don't know if they ended up doing that or not. I was at school, but they had planned on it. So that concludes the sister cities. And next month, I will be talking about the clock, which used to be on the courthouse. You can see it here in this picture and is now, of course, on our beautiful waterfront. So that'll be October 17th and also a Zoom program. I can try to answer any questions. I am definitely not a sister city expert, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. Is anybody a part of the sister city exchange? No. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And I did record the program, so it will be available on our YouTube channel coming up in the next few days. And I hope you'll join me again in October for the Clock Tower history.
Jane, can you
Yes,
hear me?
I
Hi,
can. Yeah.
this is Kathy Nichols. Hi, Ralph McMullen, who had turned the program over to the gentleman here locally. Ralph McMullen was with the DNR, and
Hmm.
he went over. He was my next door neighbor, our next door neighbor down in Lansing.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah,
Oh, my
and
goodness.
and the Ralph McMullen school is named after him in Ross Common for the DNR. But anyway, when he went over the first time before he turned the program over to the gentleman locally from East Jordan, he had brought back some things and brought him over, and he brought back chocolate covered ants, which
Oh, my
I
goodness.
ate a few of them. So I was just a little kid at the time, but it was interesting.
Oh, that's great. Oh, my gosh. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep, yep. Thanks. You did a great job.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you. Yeah, I thought this was a very interesting topic. It was
Yeah,
fun to learn about.
very good. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you.